beautiful Kate King with us today, and I'm so excited to be talking with her and introducing her to you. Kate King is a licensed professional counselor, a board certified art therapist, and an author. She's got two books running, one of which is very relevant to me right now around becoming a new mom, and the other one, which is the Radiant Life Project. In addition, Kate is the founder of the Radiant Life Project, with her mission being to create a ripple effect of well-being and empowering joy in the world. How beautiful is that? Kate is widely known for helping her clients and audience learn to cultivate radiant lives for themselves that shine so brightly they impact and improve the lives of those surrounding them. Kate's work is filled with an expansive array of inspiring resources, tools, and practices that provide an accessible entry point into a life of greater authenticity, fulfillment, and illumination. So in the specific Radiant Life Project itself, Kate's looking to engage and empower her audience with the skill base from her 15 plus years as a licensed clinical psychotherapist and board certified art therapist, as well as the wisdom that she's acquired through her own healing and growth journey in the school of life, I'm going to assume many lifetimes. Kate's work incorporates the fusion of brain sciences, diverse psychotherapeutic modalities, spiritual practices, creative expression, an attuned connection to provide a unique and effective strategy, not only for healing and growth, but for the true freedom that comes with authentic living. So I'm going to stop here and let Kate introduce herself to you and talk a little bit about what makes her glow from the inside out, and then we'll get into it.
Sounds great. First, just thank you so much for having me on your show. I'm just really passionate about this work, and it is comprised of a background as a licensed therapist, sort of taken into integration within my personal process, walking this talk, exploring the depths of the psyche and how it connects with the mental, spiritual, energetic, physical bodies to really create holistic well-being. And for each person, it looks really different. And I have a pretty wide array of offerings that I write about in my new book, and I teach in all of my offerings. That some of them are more therapeutic modalities like parts psychology, internal family systems work. Sometimes it goes into the creative lens with art therapy, and sometimes it's really just in the moment kind of intuitive conversation that leads me to support people with the big transitions in their lives, with the anxiety, the depression, the life kind of bafflement of the state of our world these days. And so my work is really just about wrapping a big love bubble around as many people as I possibly can, helping them elevate themselves to the next level of wellness that they're ready for, and really courageously look at the areas of their lives that might not be in full alignment or in deep authenticity, and start to evoke real change that helps to correct that and put them on a path where they can live authentically with high integrity, breaking generational cycles and patterns that they may be caught up in, and really just kind of growing that inner spark within their soul for the most magnificent life possible.
I loved how eclectic your work is. It's one of the things that I found very, not just curious, but playful when I was like doing the research on you. And I thought that my audience would really love that, because so many of them are creative. So many of them are pulled through like channeling and through the connection they have with their intuition into different areas. And that comes up a lot. Like, what idea do I work on first? What part of my divine mission do I, dedicate this season of my life into? And particularly, like I said, the courage of being authentic parenting. So much of what's out there in the space is around healing what happened with your mother, and not enough about stepping into the kind of mother you want to become and who you are and the identity you're going to create, whether that's with children or with your own projects. Or so when I was looking at your work, I was like, this is like, it's gonna be such a lovely fit. But for those of you that are eclectic, and I can hear the ears pricking, right, and you want to see how to make this work, then Kate King is your girl. So tell me how that works for you, because I can feel just how, like, being in the room with you is like an exercise in expansion. I can feel the curiosity, I can feel the energy, and I can feel how much you love how much you love the different things. And it's not a dabble, it's a really deep love for what you do. So tell us a little bit about your journey. How did you decide to transition from therapy into your own things? And how did that work for you with this insane amount of creativity?
Yeah, it's a good question. It really feels like a soul mission or life purpose that has been with me for my entire life. Ever since I was a child, I was very creative. I was also very interested in the human mind, what makes people tick, what makes them do the things they do. And I went through a pretty traumatic childhood in a lot of ways that felt like it was a giant classroom for learning, as I think all life challenges are. And as my life unfolded and I started to have awareness that the things that I'm being met with in life have such a deeper purpose. It's not just that life is hard and we're here until we die, just dealing with it. It's an invitation every single time something feels challenging, even to the smaller degree of just feeling triggered in a situation or feeling kind of ignited and reactive. Every time that happens, it's a reflection of self on some deep layer of basically understanding what within you still needs to heal and grow so you can reach your fullest potential and elevate beyond the base level that, so many people are at when they start their awakening process and they realize how much growth is really available for us. So in my own journey, I always worked with my own therapists. I always went to retreats. I do a ton of my own art making and writing processes. And it's really been a process of getting brave, because looking at your own stuff can be scary, and finding the right guides to support you along the way when you're doing that work and when you're starting to get honest with yourself about the areas that are still wounded or available for healing. It's important that you have the right support. And so a lot of my journey was coming into my own alignment with my community, having aligned relationships that are supportive and that don't perpetuate some of those patterns that might have kind of been adaptive in childhood, things like codependency, things like people pleasing that kept me really safe for a long time. But in adulthood, I don't need those patterns anymore, because I have a wise self that I can tap into and help me kind of have equilibration with the way that I relate to people. So it's been a process.
It's a huge deal too, because my work is mostly in the spiritual sphere. One of the things that I did very much when I was designing like the medical intuitive course was balance it with so much that I'd taken from my years training as a therapist, because in the spiritual world, there's very little feedback, there's very little accountability, there's a lot of bypassing and sometimes toxic positivity. And there's also like unrealistic expectations around growth, where instead of it being long-term sustainable growth, it's normally only like celebritified instant, which you 100% get and you will see, but it's not like the one size fits all, or what happens for the majority of people, right? It's, I think, more what sells than what is most people's experience of their life spiritual journey and evolution. So particularly the support, I think that's such a deep thing to speak to an audience that's been told they should be able to do it all by themselves. They shouldn't need that support and that supervision, which I've taken for granted because I had, the counseling, the psychotherapy. It's part of what you need to be able to get your qualifications. And it's quite different introducing that into the spiritual circles in the beginning, because they're not used to that level of, like you said, support, but also like visibility, right? Because you can't hide or wear a mask forever. If somebody's with you and there's real companionship, that mask doesn't last.
Right.
The stuff comes whether you're ready for it or not.
Right.
So I'm going to let you choose which road you go down, but it's such a beautiful and important thing to bring up, because I in my audience, I come across that a lot, especially because they blame themselves. They go into that victim conscious. Why am I not progressing? But they don't believe they deserve help. So it's a very important area to speak to.
I think what you're speaking to as well is the holistic nature of this type of work, that it's not just spiritual work. It has to happen in the physical body too, because we are incarnated here in 3D, in human form, and we're doing work here that is for the greater evolution of our soul, but it's only learning that we can do when we're in the physical body. Otherwise, we wouldn't need one. So there's a lot of learning that is really important for integration between the mind, body, and spirit, and having those systems all on board, all doing the work simultaneously is the key to the healing. So if someone is really interested in physical fitness, but they're not really thinking about their mental health or their spiritual well-being, that's only one facet. And so until they start to bring all of those pieces in and see themselves as a systemic being that has so many dimensions and fractals, then it's sort of lopsided in that way. And so I think for people who are feeling stuck in their growth process, that would be the first question that I would ask them is, how much are you attuning to all the aspects of yourself versus having a narrow focus on only one?
I think that this idea that if it's very symptomatic approach versus a holistic approach. If there's a problem in your life, then you focus on the problem instead of realizing that the problem is the effect, not the cause.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So
And I think it's also part of our societies that we focus on problems and we don't tend to notice the light and the elements that are really working. And I think we're adaptively wired that way by Mother Nature, because if we know what the problem is, then we know how to keep it at bay so that we can survive, because ultimately nature is all about survival. But because we have the evolved human brain with our prefrontal cortex, it can be more than just survival for us. We're capable of higher level thinking, higher level connection, really incredible depths. And to bring all of that on board means if something's not working in your life, noticing also what is working in your life so that you can bring in more of that and grow it like a pilot light. You can help to fuel it so that it can really start to roar with brilliance instead of burning low. Because when we burn low, we kind of disable ourselves on an intrinsic level by not having enough fuel. And the way that we fuel ourselves is by bringing in more of that light. And that's to balance out the things that aren't working. Nobody is perfect. Nobody is all light. We have to have shadow, and the light and the shadow together need to be in combination and in synergy for the growth process.
Yeah, the light and the shadow do need to be in balance 100%. And I love what you're saying about letting yourself be, giving yourself a chance. You're not a project. You're a human being. And a huge part of that is, like you said, trusting life, trusting that the divine curriculum is perfect. So it comes up so much because I teach, what I teach is medical intuition. So my audience is used to me talking a lot about metaphysical connections between disease and the physical body and the holistic integrations. It's like, if your finances is messed up, the stress then causes manifestations in the physical. If the romance life is, so it's following the breadcrumbs, or the traumas, if you call breadcrumbs traumas, to where the root is, and then kind of pulling that out. And the shadow work is a big aspect of sickness, because you're only as sick as your secrets, right? Even from yourself. So it's a very it's a beautiful journey, and it's that expansion. But at the same time, I think exactly because there's so many ideas, and especially if you are connected, there's so many shiny things. It's important to be like, yes, that is a good idea, but does it fit into my particular space? Does it fit into my particular journey? Or is it not the right timing or the right energy, so that you can keep that fire burning authentically, instead of it, looking good to everyone else, but you're kind of drowning on the inside?
Right. And that's a really profound level of alignment to be able to continue to be open to possibilities and notice when there are doors that open for you and potential that becomes available for you, and also be attuned enough to yourself to know if that's a yes for right now. And just because it may not be a yes for right now doesn't mean it's not a yes ever. It just means that in the circumstance that you're in, on the level that you're at, it just might not be a fit. And if you force it, it could end up just being really arduous, really draining, and potentially something that you have to pivot again. So I think that flexibility is really important with being able to align with what feels like a yes and with what feels like a no, just sort of putting it on the side. Because in the world of expansion, there's also an element of contraction that needs to happen that's really important for growth. Just like a rubber band, if it's expanding all the time and it's never contracting, it will snap. So we need to do the same. We expand when we grow, and then we have to contract a little bit to integrate what we've just learned. And with each expansion, the starting place becomes broader. So you're expanding then from a new baseline and contracting a little less. And with each iteration, the growth continues exponentially. But the contractions are an element of that is so crucial, because it keeps us from overextending and getting burned out. Because the spiritual journey can be an element of burnout for people, just like any other work in the world. And I think sometimes people forget that. And there's just this kind of continuous movement of deeper and more and expand and expand and expand. And they forget that we are limited by the human body. We're not in ethereal form right now. And so we have to honor that. We need our rest. We need nourishment. We need periods of integration. And so the contraction is really important.
I really think that's so powerful how you said that. And it makes so much sense, especially if you think about how muscles work. It's exactly like that, you know? You grow to a certain extent by testing, but then without that contraction, you know, you get a sprained ankle or a sprained leg or a sprained arm, and you have to grow in proportion, you know, and that's a really deep way of putting it. And it's particularly for my community, because when it comes to healers, especially of disease, when you have a lot of people that you're working on dense stuff with, and you're going to hospitals and, you know, children's wards where you're potentially working with one person, but you may be surrounded by 20 or 30 people who are not well. Right. And so much of the work is clearing the wounded healer archetype, right? Is clearing these old generational beliefs that you have to get sick or absorb the disease in order to be of service and be of light. And so many of the most, like, there's some incredible healers. And the first ever instant healer that I met, where he could just touch you and your disease would disappear, he was physically ill. He actually had ME because he was so burnt out. He'd taken on so many illnesses. And I was so young, I didn't have any understanding that that's what was going on. Mm-hmm. Right. But the more I grew into healing, the more I realized it was not him, it was systemic. Right. Even with Louise Hay, it starts with cancer or with, and you can see it going across the healers, because unless you have that resolved, especially that shadow within you, you can't be in the presence of somebody in that space and not be like, oh. So it's a very, like, that contraction. And I've actually never in all of my studies heard somebody talk about the contraction with the love that you just did there.
I do love the contraction. I think it's such a crucial element, because that's kind of the cocoon where you get to cozy up and let yourself release the pressure for forward movement, and you get to just be cozy with what you've just accomplished and really sit with it. Integration is a big deal when you're moving through the growth layers, because if you don't integrate, it's more of what you were talking about at the beginning, like those fad diets, where the spiritual growth is not just instant, it's not a light switch. And the integration allows you to really fully, completely understand and make your last learning part of you before you move on to the next learning. And if we move too fast through those layers, there's no way that it can all become part of us. It's just too much for our systems. So we have to pace ourselves and know that there's really no destination in this work, and there's no way to predict the work that's ahead of you, because we are part of a quantum multiverse of possibilities. And there are so many potentials for the way our growth will express itself. There's no right way. There's only the moment and what feels aligned in that moment. And you will not know what's aligned unless you've integrated what came first.
I was doing another interview this morning, and we got really deep into the Course in Miracles principle of self-hatred masquerading as self-love, and how only really by developing your self-awareness can you tell the difference, because things can really be illusions, and you can very much convince yourself that something is loving when actually it comes from fear, like you said, the fad diet, or it's not a representation of nurturing or loving your body. And then neglect is just another aspect of fear. No matter what you're covering the shit with, right? It's still shit. You have to go into what the core issues are. So it's the fear mind is tricky.
Yeah. And I think this is where forgiveness and grace comes in, that you do the best you can on the layer that you're in. And if later on you realize that you were looking at your work through some sort of distorted lens, or you were flooded by fear and you just didn't realize it until after the fact, that's when you take that as another lesson, and you have forgiveness for yourself for not knowing things before you could possibly know them. Right? We can't expect our past selves to know and understand what our current selves do. That's the process, is we had to get from that past self to this current self. And this current self, no matter how wise and expansive we feel, will be a past self for some future self that's going to know even more. And so if you see yourself as just a series of links in a long chain of your soul's evolution, we're each just somewhere in the middle. And we may find out that the things we know to be true now are illusions. And that's okay. We correct and we pivot as we go. The more we learn, the better we do, and the more we